great job finishing passage 2 of test number 2. We are now on to the third passage of this exam, and you'll find that this is a science passage. Not only is it a science passage, but it is also the double passage. So the plan is still the same. We're going to read the excerpt for the first passage alone, then we'll read and annotate the passage as we go, and then we are going to use the My Answer strategy when we're answering those questions. So the excerpt for the first passage reads as follows. Passage 1 is adapted from Nicholas Carr, The Web Shatters Focus, Rewires Brains. So that title gets us in the right mind frame that this passage is going to be about how the web rewires our brains. Let's go for it. The mental consequences of our online info crunching are not universally bad. Certain cognitive skills are strengthened by our use of computers and the net. Let's pause here and annotate real quick. Right off the bat, we learned that cognitive skills are strengthened. So I'm going to write cognitive skills positive. Let's keep going. These tend to involve more primitive mental functions such as hand-eye coordination, reflex response, and the processing of visual cues. One much cited study of video gaming revealed that after just 10 days of playing action games on computers, a group of young people had significantly boosted the speed with which they could shift their visual focus between various images. And so let's annotate some more. Here you see an expansion of what the cognitive skills are. And those cognitive skills are coordination, reflex response. So we could just point an arrow here to just remind us where those cognitive skills are located. Okay, let's keep going. We're going to pick up from line 13. It's likely that web browsing also strengthens brain functions related to fast-paced problem solving, particularly when it requires spotting patterns in a welter of data. A British study of the way women search for medical information online indicated that an experienced internet user can, at least in some cases, assess the trustworthiness and probable value of a web page in a matter of seconds. The more we practice surfing and scanning, the more adept our brain becomes at those tasks. So here we see the author making a second case for web browsing, and here we learn that brain functions are strengthened. So I'm going to say brain functions and do a positive. It's a positive thing. And then he goes on to give an example from a study. So here we can write proof for that. It came from a British study. And the argument that the more we practice surfing and scanning, the more adept our brain becomes at performing those tasks. Let's keep going from line 23. But it would be a serious mistake to look narrowly at such benefits and conclude that the web is making us smarter. In a science article published in the early 2009, prominent developmental psychologist Patricia Greenfield reviewed more than 40 studies of the effects of various types of media on intelligence and learning ability. So let's pause here and annotate something that just stands out to us right now. We learn right here of a warning that we shouldn't take those benefits that we were learning about, brain functions becoming stronger and the cognitive skills being improved, that we shouldn't assume that web surfing makes us smarter. So here we can say not smarter. Remember, it's not about what I'm writing. To me, I'm writing out what's going to make the most sense. So for you, just make sure that you're making quick annotations, 1 or 2, 3 words to help you locate stuff as you answer the questions. So let's keep going. We're going to pick up from line 29, where we are getting ready to find out the findings of the research conducted by the scientist. So she concluded that every medium develops some cognitive skills at the expense of others. That's important. So skills improved at the expense of others. So I'm going to write skills at the expense of others. Our growing use of the net and other screen-based technologies, she wrote, has led to the widespread and sophisticated development of visual spatial skills. But those gains go hand in hand with a weakening of our capacity for the kind of deep processing that underpins mindful knowledge acquisition, inductive analysis, critical thinking, imagination, and reflection. So here we learn that although visual spatial skills increase, there are many other skills that decrease. So I'm just going to draw an up arrow and a down arrow to show that there's an exchange. While one area is improving, another area is declining. Let's keep going. We know that the human brain is highly plastic. Neurons and synapses change as circumstances change. When we adapt to a new cultural phenomenon, including the use of a new medium, we end up with a different brain, says Michael Marzanich, a pioneer of the field of neuroplasticity. That means our online habits continue to reverberate in the workings of our brain cells even when we're not at a computer. We're exercising the neurocircuits devoted to skimming and multitasking while ignoring those used for reading and thinking deeply. In this last paragraph, we learn about how the brain is so-called plastic and adaptable. So I'm just going to annotate plastic and adaptable just in case this is mentioned in any of the questions. We know where to come back and find it. Now that we read the whole first passage, it is time for us to go on and try answering a few questions. Let's go for it. So question 1 is a detail/little picture type of question. Let's go ahead and read it. The author of passage 1 indicates which of the following about the use of screen-based technologies. So if you're going to try to apply the My Answer strategy, we can tell that the author of this first passage was for using screen-based technologies in that they helped improve our cognitive skills and also our brain functions. We know this because we annotated such here and also here. But let's go through the choices and see if we can find something that's agreeing with what we're already thinking. So choice A says, it should be thoroughly studied. I don't think that was said, so we can eliminate A. It makes the brain increasingly rigid. That's definitely opposite of what was said in the last paragraph. We learned that the brain is plastic and it's malleable. So C says, it has some positive effects, which is true because cognitive skills improve, brain functions improve. So it could be C. Let's look at D. It should be widely encouraged. That was never said, so it would have to be C as our correct answer because that's directly in the passage. Let's go on to the next question. This 23rd question is an evidence question. Let's read it. Which choice provides the best evidence for the answer to the previous question? So there are several places where we learned about some positive things that come about with web-based technologies. So looking at our choices, we can look at choice A says lines 3 to 4, but in lines 3 to 4, it didn't talk about the benefits yet. Those came after 6, so A cannot be it. Let's look at the next one, 23 through 25. 23 says, but it would be a serious mistake to look narrowly at such benefits and conclude that the web is making us smarter. So that's definitely not a benefit. So B is not it. C is saying 25 through 29. So let's look there, see if that could be it. In the Science article published in the early 2009, prominent developmental psychologist Patricia Greenfield reviewed more than 40 studies. So this is just telling us about a research study that was conducted. So C cannot be it. It's got to be D. Let's just go ahead and prove it. Benefits, 29 through 31. She concluded that every medium develops some cognitive skills at the expense of others, and that would have to be it. All right, so we know D is the answer to 23. Let's move on to the next question. Question 24 is another detail/little picture question. Let's read it. The author of passage 1 indicates that becoming adept at using the internet would it make people complacent about their health? Nope, health is not talked about at all. Undermine the ability to think deeply. Yes, that was mentioned. Increase people's social contacts. This was not mentioned at all. D was improve people's self-confidence. Not at all, so we know B is the clear answer. All right, so we go on to question 25. This is a vocabulary question. As used in line 40, plastic most nearly means what? So line 40 was over here, and this is a word in context. So we're going to read the word in the sentence just to see in which way that word was used and what function it plays in that sentence. We know that the human brain is highly plastic. Neurons and synapses change as circumstances change. This was talking about how flexible, how malleable our brains are. And literally the word malleable is in the choices, so C would have to be it. We can move on to the next question. Now, it starts off by asking the author of passage 2, so we know that we can't really answer this question just yet because we haven't read the second passage, and this would be a great place to go and read passage 2, so let's do that. And now we can read the excerpt for passage 2, starting with passage 2 is from Steven Pinker, Mind over Mass Media. All right, so now that we know the title of this passage, let's go ahead and read it. Critics of new media sometimes use science itself to press their case, citing research that shows how experience can change the brain. But cognitive neuroscientists roll their eyes at such talk. Yes, every time we learn a fact or skill, or the wiring of the brain changes. It's not as if the information is stored in the pancreas, but the existence of neuroplasticity does not mean the brain is a blob of clay pounded into shape by experience. So it sounds like this author is claiming that skills are not transferable. If you train your brain to do one thing, you're going to be good at just that one thing and nothing else. So here we can just say skills not transferable, and we are given several examples of how a scientist would read lots of science, novelists read lots of novels, and so on. Let's pick it back up from line 81, starting here. The effects of consuming electronic media are likely to be far more limited than the panic implies. Media critics write as if the brain takes on the qualities of whatever it consumes. the informational equivalent of you are what you eat. As with ancient peoples who believed that eating fierce animals made them fierce, they assumed that watching quick cuts in rock videos turns your mental life into quick cuts, or that reading bullet points and online postings turns your thoughts into bullet points and online postings. So here, once again, we see the author rebuttaling common knowledge that you are what you eat, and that has been likened to watching media or consuming media, which is whatever you watch, you become more like it. So the author of this passage is rebuttaling that notion. So having read this passage in its entirety, we can go on and pick up the questions and finish this passage. Let's go for it. So back to question 26. The author of passage 2 refers to the novel War and Peace primarily to suggest that Woody Allen, I think when that was mentioned, was to highlight the ineffectiveness of speed reading. So that's the kind of thing we're looking for in our answers here. So let's see. Did not like Tolstoy's writing style. Nope, it wasn't about writing style. Could not comprehend the novel by speed reading it. That's it. So it's got to be B, but let's just read the others. Had become quite skilled at multitasking. That's not it. Regretted having read such a long novel. So D is not it either. So we move on to question 27, another detail/little picture question. According to the author of passage 2, what do novelists and scientists have in common? So we read about novelists and scientists in this region, and we learned that they only get better by doing more of what it is that they do, immersing themselves in their trade. So if you're a novelist, read more novels. If you're a scientist, read a lot of science. So that's the answer we're looking for question 27. They take risks when they pursue knowledge. Nope, that's not what it was said. They are eager to improve their minds. Maybe, so let's keep B. They are curious about other subjects. That was never said. They become absorbed in their own fields. It's actually D. That's literally what it says. So D would be the answer to question 27. Let's go to question 28. This is a function question. The analogy in the final sentence of passage 2 has primarily which effect? So the analogy was you are what you eat in passage 2. And that was likening our brains, or the notion that people have that whatever you watch, you become more of it. Armed with that knowledge, we can actually try to answer this question. Let's just go through the choices one by one. It uses ornate language to illustrate a difficult concept. It employs humor to soften a severe opinion of human behavior. It alludes to the past to evoke a nostalgic response. So there's nothing about nostalgia here, so C would not make sense. It criticizes the view of a particular group. Yes, this is what this was doing. It was criticizing the notion that you are what you eat because the brain doesn't function in that same way. So we can say without any shadow of doubt that D is the correct answer for question 28. Let's keep going. Question 29 is a big picture/main point question. The main purpose of each passage is to do what? Compare brain function in those who play games on the internet and those who browse on it. That was not the main purpose at all. Report on the problem-solving skills of individuals with varying levels of internet experience. Nope, this was not it either. Take a position on increasing financial support for studies related to technology and intelligence. C was not it, so it's got to be D. Make an argument about the effects of electronic media use on the brain. That's precisely what we just read about in both passages. So let's go to question 30. Another detail/little picture question. Which choice best describes the relationship between the two passages? So let's go through each choice one by one and we'll make a decision as we go. Passage 2 relates first-hand experiences that contrasts with the clinical approach in passage 1. Let's go to B. Passage 2 critiques the conclusion drawn from the research discussed in passage 1. So we know that passage 2 was criticizing what was said in passage 1. We know this because we annotated it up here. And we said that the author is in disagreement pretty early on in this passage right here. We said disagreement, so B could be it. Let's look at the other choices. Passage 2 takes a high-level view of a result, and passage 1 examines that result in depth. That was not it. Let's look at D. Passage 2 predicts the negative reactions that the findings discussed in passage 1 might produce. That's not it, so it's got to be B. Passage 2 is criticizing the conclusion drawn from the research discussed in passage 1. So let's go to question 31. Another detail/little picture question. On which of the following points would the authors of both passages most likely agree? What would they agree on? So let's go through the choices. Computer-savvy children tend to demonstrate better hand-eye coordination than do their parents. They wouldn't agree on that. So let's look at B. Those who criticize consumers of electronic media tend to overreact in their criticism. They would not agree on that either. Improved visual-spatial skills do not generalize to improved skills in other areas. Yes, they both made that claim, so C could be it. Let's look at D. Internet users are unlikely to prefer reading on-screen text to reading actual books. So D was not said. The only thing that they both mentioned was improved visual-spatial skills. All right, let's go to question 32. It's an evidence-based question, and it reads, which choice provides the best evidence that the author of passage 2 would agree to some extent with the claim attributed to Michael Merzanich in lines 41 to 43 in passage 1? So this is somewhat of a complex question because it involves two parts. One, we have to go back to passage 1, read lines 41 through 43, and then come back to passage 2 and find the lines that would most likely agree with these lines from passage 1. Let's go ahead and do that. So line 41 starts here. So we'll read this. When we adapt to a new cultural phenomenon, including the use of a new medium, we end up with a different brain, says Michael Merzanich. So every time we adapt to a cultural phenomenon, including the use of a new medium, we end up with a different brain. So I believe the author of passage 2 was agreeing with that, and he infused a little bit of sarcasm/humor. He said, well, of course that's true because the information is not stored in the pancreas, right? And that came pretty early on in this passage, right in this region. So let's see. First choice says 51 through 53, critics of new media sometimes use science itself to press their case, citing research that shows how experience can change the brain. So not really there. Let's read the next one, which is 54 through 56. But cognitive neuroscientists roll their eyes at such talk. Yes, every time we learn a fact or skill, the wiring of the brain changes. So that would have to be it. This is agreeing with what was said up here. The brain does change. So B would have to be the correct answer to this question. And that concludes passage 3 of test number 2. Great job on hanging in there and giving it your best shot. So we're going to continue practicing, and I will see you in the next lesson where we'll be going over passage 4 of test number 2. See you there.